Hello. I'm very pleased to be here with my colleagues from Kentucky, and I'm really riding their coattails here. I'm amazed to be here amongst the people who are building the tools and developing the workflows that we use at Kentucky. I'm the new digital archivist at the University of Kentucky, and I've been there for about 9 months, and I'll be presenting a case study on our efforts to archive an older digital humanities website that was taking advantage of dynamic content. Oh, I need to do this twice. So my UK colleagues who are here, Ruth Bryan and Emily Collier, are really our web archivists, and I handle all sorts of born digital materials and attempt to preserve them. So last June when I started, I received a crash course on our great web archiving program that's been going on for about 5 years. And then in July, Ruth, our university archivist, passed me a project that had proven complicated and fell outside the scope of our usual web archiving procedures and asked me to take a look. So a professor in Kentucky's computer science department, Raphael Finkel, had asked the libraries to archive a project for him. He was the technical editor for it. It was called the Suda Online. And the original request arrived in 2019, and there was some back and forth. We tried to crawl it. It did not capture well, and then a global pandemic started, and it sat on a shelf, as is justifiable. This is one of the captures from 2019, and if you looked at the live version, which is still up today, you would look at it and you would think, this looks great, nice job. You did the thing. But it's a dirty house of lies, as it turns out. That's a joke. But it's, it looks like the thing, and it maybe serves as a monument to the website. But this, if the site itself should cease to exist, this would cease to exist as a true functioning surrogate for the site. It didn't meet our needs, and it didn't meet his needs, and it captured form, but it lacked function. And in this instance, function is central to its purpose. It looks great, but it is not itself a work of art. It's a work of scholarship. So in order to understand the scope of the problem, pause and explain what this is, why we wanted to archive it, the specific challenges it posed, my current solutions, and a larger question, which is what does it mean to remove a tool that is so fundamentally online in its creation and purpose from the context of the live internet. So the Suda is a real physical document. It's an enormous encyclopedia penned in the 10th century in Byzantine Greek. It's a combination between our understanding of a dictionary and encyclopedia, and it's a compendium of knowledge of the ancient Mediterranean world. So in addition to being a work in itself, it contains passages from texts that are essentially extinct, and we don't know about them other than their mentions in the Suda. So it was preserved in a series of medieval manuscripts, preserved 1,000 years essentially, published multiple times since the 14th century, and then the most recent authoritative version of the work was published in 1928 by a Danish scholar, Ada Adler. So the Suda text in her edition is in Greek, with all the front matter and annotations in Latin. So the Suda Online is a continuation of this wonderful tradition that preserves and shares knowledge. It began with an email listserv question somebody asked in 1998, does anybody know of an English translation of the Suda? And the answer amongst all these classicists and linguists was no, there isn't. So it became this ideal early internet digital humanities project where they could work together around the world and build this tool. And it predates Wikipedia by, I think, 3 years. And our Professor Finkel helped build the back-end infrastructure for the site, along with the means for collaborators to submit contributions and edits, suggestions, and then a University of Kentucky Classics professor and an early digital humanist, Ross Scaife, really drove it. Ross Scaife passed away in 2008, but the final translation of over 31,000 individual entries in the Suda was deposited in 2014. So in a way, it was complete. And the site is still live at its second location, as the earlier website has already been retired, essentially. And editors are still actively making adjustments because that's what scholars do. So this is the Suda online as it looks today. It's the only English translation of this text in any format of the world. As far as I know, apart from Greek, it's not translated in any other modern language today. So it's a monument to the persistence of scholars and human knowledge, and it's a monument to late 1990s web design. So the question for me then is, why don't you just crawl? The answer is one that I assume that many of you here, maybe everyone here, is way more familiar with than I was 9 months ago. The site is dependent on server-side operations, so the individual entries don't exist as static HTML pages. They're entries in a database that even if you click on a page that indicates it's the 300th alpha page, that page is dynamically generated from the database. It doesn't exist otherwise. It's dynamically generated via Perl scripts that query a database on the web server, and much of the function of the site depends, too, on either user search queries or browsable subjects. So this is what an archived version of the site looks like if you attempt to do a search on the archived version of the website. You get the claim that there's an empty string. That'll happen to you 31,000 times. If you can keep going. That's great. So the Wayback Machine's own automated crawls do fill in some of these instances of individual pages, but not all of them. And regardless, it was my introduction to this particular problem, and the solutions were elusive. So first idea was just handed to me by our donor, the professor, Raphael Finkel, in part because he came to us not to archive the site, he wanted us to host it forever. And for many of the reasons that were just explained in the previous presentation, that is not a good idea, it's not feasible, and if every University of Kentucky professor came to us with this request, you can imagine how that would look. It would look like we're not a library anymore, we are a web hosting service. So Raphael had retired recently, so he's an emeritus professor, and we explained that we couldn't do this, but we could try to crawl it. And when that didn't fully work, he offered us a copy of the full web server, and that was what we initially received. And I should acknowledge that to any extent that I've been successful here, I've been very fortunate in a number of different factors. Most of us rely on web archiving tools that might require the acquiescence of a donor or entity, but not their active intervention. So in this case, we couldn't rely on that sort of what I've been thinking of as passive web archiving. So we were fortunate to have a donor with the interest, the access, and the knowledge necessary to share the site on the server side. And if we were attempting to preserve this work without his cooperation or with bureaucratic obstacles or layers of convoluted IT hedge maze, or if our donor was incapacitated in some manner, this would not have been possible. And then on top of that, I was fortunate to be a new employee at an institution that was giving me time to learn new subjects, new areas, and if I didn't have the time or flexibility to pursue this kind of work, then it just wouldn't have been possible as well. So not everyone or every organization is able to offer the time that I spent looking into this. So the initial server we received as an OVA file, which is a packaged, a tarred OVF file, which is open virtualization format. And that's a fairly universal means of packaging the contents of a server, not just web servers, as a virtual machine or VM. It includes the metadata, what type of OS and specs it should possess, so that other users can load it up as a virtual machine on tools such as Oracle's VM VirtualBox. So in this case, this was an Ubuntu web server running Apache using a command line interface. As a novice, I knew that we had the whole thing, but could we actually serve this? Could somebody come to our reading room? Could we load up the server on the guest machine, run it on the host machine? So basically on this laptop, I can run both the web server and view it as the website exactly as it was. And ultimately, that worked. But that's a weird way to serve up a website, as if it's a leather-bound book, and as if we're only going to have the only copy of this book in the entire world. But But eventually, we did get it to work, and I got to know Raphael and kind of the history of the project along the way. I sat down with him for 90 minutes, and it was like a masterclass. It was fantastic. And he gave me an updated version with the newest, most recent versions of the site. So that worked. The full site, arguably, is preserved. Of course, the cons are that offline storage is going to limit access. Visitors are not able to, just, we could arguably give them the file. It's in the public domain. So somebody with a level of expertise could do the exact same thing, and we could give them a 2 gigabyte OVA file. Long-term sustainability, you're limited to the, how long are we going to have VirtualBox? How long will the OVA file be a standard that people are going to be able to access? And for other projects, this might not be tenable because you need access to the whole server, you need permissions. And in this case, we were lucky because pretty much everything is located on this one web server. If there were external components that it drew from using APIs or things like that, they would die if we only had access to that server. So another solution that actually surmounts that problem is one you'll hear about a lot tomorrow, hopefully, is the ReproZip web. So I was in the early stages of figuring out what to even do here. I went to IPRES and I met the ReproZip web team and saw their presentation. It's a group from NYU and Web Recorder. And so again, they'll be presenting tomorrow. Their abstract of their presentation sounded like exactly what I needed. So I recommend, if you're available, go there. Shameless plug, no endorsement. No, all endorsement. No financial, anyway. So with ReproZip Web, you can capture server-sided actions. Instead of crawling, you're tracing. Essentially, you install it on the web server. It packages up that website in a different format. And then you can run it through Web Recorder. It can gather external elements, wrap it up in one package, and then you can, ideally, you can run a repro server that replays sites that are far more complex than the Suda Online. The pros are that potentially, this is ideal for really difficult projects, especially digital humanities projects that are really server rule laden and use all sorts of resources. It's also much smaller output size-wise, logistically, than a server image, and has a lower barrier to serving access than a virtual machine. I could share an RPZ file that they produce with ReproZip and give that to somebody to load into a repro server or onto the one that is being hosted by NYU. Challenges, it's technically complex. You need the same access and permissions to servers that you would need to have the server image. And there's still, it's young. So it's an early question about widespread acceptance and the sustainability of the RPZ standard. We hope that we're doing the best that we can with the various file types that we use. But that being said, RPZ. A larger question, which is really the reason they allowed me up here, is this larger philosophical question that I had about kind of what does it mean to take a website offline. So I'll go through this very quickly, but when the Suda Online was first proposed in 1998, there was this question is like, does this exist? And the answer is like, no, this doesn't exist. And now it exists. And maybe the price of its existence is to some extent the possibility that they could have done a print translation. Instead of that, they chose this. So this is the only format in which this text exists in this format. It's as rare as any book that we have on our shelves. And it gives me the howling fantods to think about dropping this vase, so to speak, and being responsible for that. And it feels like a potential betrayal to history that people could have preserved this manuscript for 1,000 years, and it comes to us, and 25 years later, we dump it. Like Leonardo DiCaprio, that was my joke. So if we do successfully archive a single offline version to be fed out to users at their request to treat this flexible digital object as if it's a roll of vellum in an acid-free box, is that enough? Or have we fundamentally altered the work in a way that destroys some component of its essence in a way that we should not necessarily even attempt? So, these static surrogates, they're good, they're helpful, they memorialize knowledge, but this is not just a memorial, this isn't a tool. It is the only version of this text, and I view it kind of differently. if you look at my presentation afterwards or like it afterwards, there's a lot of question about what it means to have a website in context. What is its fonts? And in this case, I would argue that the fonts of this website is its temporal counterparts on the live internet. And so the Wayback Machine is great for kind of allowing you to mimic versions of what it is to experience this website in context with its peers and those that built it as well. So I'll just close by saying that, I get so nervous at the idea that I am kind of like, I am the only monk. I'm like the last monk in the tower, and I've got this script that, 200 people across 20 different countries spent 20 years constructing. It's gilded as much as anything, I think. And so last week I reached out to Professor Finkel and I said, I know that this is not your intention. I know this ruins it in some ways, but have you talked about a print version of the Suda? He's like, why would anybody want that? Yeah. And then I was like, could you make a giant 31,000 page PDF, please? And he's like, what? It was, I like groveled. I was like, please, just one other surrogate. That's all I ask. Something that I know is sustainable. But he reached out to the other editors, and the first two had the same reaction. They said, why would anybody want that? But the third said, actually, I'm in early talks to print this, to publish this. And the rest of the listserv was bewildered, but I was delighted. And in the meantime, Professor Finkel has informed me that there are 12 more websites that he would like to archive with us. So my references are there. Thank you. If you have any questions, I think I have 3 minutes left.